California residents have long been familiar with the potential devastation that the San Andreas Fault could unleash. But now, as NASA releases groundbreaking new findings, it seems that the worst-case scenario may be more likely than anyone ever imagined. With flooding of unprecedented proportions expected, the fate of this coastal state hangs in the balance. Stay tuned as we follow this developing story and bring you the latest updates from Ground Zero. Based on models that take into account the long-term rate of slip on the San Andreas Fault, as well as the amount of offset that happened on the fault in 1906, the most reasonable estimate is that earthquakes of the type that occurred in 1906 happen roughly once every 200 years. According to the assessment of the Working Group on California Earthquake Probabilities, there is only a very little probability, approximately 2%, that such an earthquake might take place over the next 30 years. This is because of the amount of time that is required to collect slips equivalent to a 20-foot offset. A magnitude 7 earthquake on the Hayward Fault, the peninsula segment of the San Andreas Line, or the Rogers Creek Fault poses the greatest risk to the San Francisco Bay Area over the next 30 years. This is in contrast to the 1906 earthquake, which posed only a minimal hazard to the area. The likelihood of one or more significant earthquakes with a magnitude of 6.7 or higher occurring on faults in the San Francisco Bay Area over the next 3 decades. The San Francisco Bay Area as a whole is at risk for earthquakes, and a significant earthquake will likely occur before the year 2032. Having this information will assist people in continuing their preparations for future earthquakes and making decisions that are based on accurate information. The San Andreas Fault came to global attention after the devastating earthquake and fire that struck San Francisco on April 18, 1906. This earthquake, however, was just one of several that have occurred along this fault in the past 15 to 20 million years as a result of periodic displacement. The San Andreas Fault is a prominent fissure in the Earth's crust that may be found in the most western section of the North American continent. After traveling in a trajectory that is more than 800 miles long and in a northwesterly direction from the most northern point of the Gulf of California through Western California in the United States, the fault eventually emerges into the Pacific Ocean in the general neighborhood of San Francisco. This path begins at the most northern point of the Gulf of California and continues through Western California. Tectonic action along the fault has been linked to sporadic but significant earthquakes that have their epicenters quite close to the surface along the route of the fault. These earthquakes include a violent and disastrous quake that took place in the Los Angeles neighborhood of Northridge in 1994, which took place along one of the San Andreas Fault system's biggest secondary faults. The first of these earthquakes took place in San Francisco in 1906, and the second, which took place there in 1989, was not as serious an occurrence. The San Andreas Fault was the epicenter of every one of these earthquakes. The transformed boundary between two major plates of the Earth's crust is thought to be the San Andreas Fault. These plates are the North American plate to the north and east, and the Northern Pacific plate to the south and west. The San Andreas Fault is located in California. In this regard, the theory of plate tectonics comes into play. The San Andreas Fault is classified as a strike-slip fault because the Northern Pacific plate is moving in a northerly direction while sliding laterally across the North American plate. Throughout the entirety of geologic time, the movement of the tectonic plates about one another has been consistently close to 1 centimeter per year on average. Since the beginning of the 20th century, however, the pace of movement has accelerated to somewhere between 4 and 6 millimeters per year on an annual basis. Certain segments of the fault line shifted as much as 6.4 meters in different directions as a result of the earthquake that took place in 1906. The vast majority of California's inhabitants live near the San Andreas Fault because of its proximity to the state's primary urban center. A tunnel for the Bay Area Rapid Transit System, BART, has been bored straight through the fault zone. Furthermore, there are communities, towns, housing projects, and roadways that have been developed immediately on top of it. Examples of the preventative measures that have been implemented include the construction of structures that can absorb seismic shocks and the hardening of highways and bridges to withstand the effects of earthquake. The San Andreas Fault is a large fracture in the crust of the Earth that was produced by the movement of two tectonic plates in opposite directions at the same time. This fault has been related to several destructive events, including large earthquakes, fissures, and landslides, and there is a chance that another one is on the horizon. In geology, a fault is a crack or series of faults that run between two major rock fragments that are moving relative to one another. For example, the length of the San Andreas Fault, which is around 800 miles, nearly 1,300 kilometers long, makes it one of the longest faults in the world. It is also common for there to be a discernible shift in position on one side of the fault compared to the other side of the fault. The theory of plate tectonics is to blame for faults. Although the crust of the Earth is solid, it is supported by a liquid-filled mantle below it. As a consequence of this process, The crust fractures into distinct, rigid portions that are referred to as tectonic plates. These plates move under and along one another, causing a shift in their relative locations to one another as they do so. Due to the high levels of friction that are present, the plates do not always properly glide or flow past each other, which generates a lot of stress. However, this is not always the case. This has the potential to cause the plate to develop cracks and fissures on the inside. Another side effect of these processes is the occurrence of earthquakes, which typically take place along the boundaries between the tectonic plates. As a result of the fact that the San Andreas Fault marks the boundary between the Northern Pacific Plate and the North American Plate, the same thing is true there. Because the relative movement between the plates along the San Andreas Fault is almost entirely horizontal, geologists refer to it as a transform fault rather than a subduction fault, which is a term used to describe faults that can be found in subduction zones. There are also a great number of large transform faults, and seismic activity is frequently related to these faults as well. Earthquakes are frequently experienced at fault lines and the margins of tectonic plates because of the friction that occurs between the plates. The edges of the plates aren't absolutely smooth, so there is friction between them that makes it difficult for them to move past one another. At certain locations, often along the fault line, where the plates are rubbing up against one another, a greater amount of energy is stored and the stress level rises. An earthquake takes place when there is a buildup of tension at a critical point that results in the rupture of a fault and the subsequent release of the pent-up strain energy in the form of seismic waves. For the most part, the San Andreas Fault presents itself as a linear trough, and the linear arrangement of lakes, bays, and valleys in this trough is spectacular when viewed from above. From below, though, these same qualities take on a more subdued look. It is possible that many motorists in the San Francisco Bay Area, along Tamales Bay, in the Cajon and Tejon Passes, and in the Crystal Springs Reservoir area are unaware that they are in the San Andreas seismic zone. Observing the landscape carefully will reveal the fault's true location. The area is distinguished by a variety of landforms, including long, straight escarpments, narrow bridges, and small undrained ponds created by the settling of small blocks within the fault zone. Upon crossing the fault, the direction of various streams abruptly changes to the right. When is the San Andreas Fault most likely to experience another major earthquake? There are sections of the San Andreas Fault and other plate boundaries where significant earthquakes have not occurred for a very long time. This is also true of other plate borders. The timing of when certain seismic gaps may result in significant earthquakes has been predicted by seismologists with a high degree of accuracy. According to the findings of geological studies carried out over the past 1400 to 1500 years, the southern San Andreas Fault has been the epicenter of significant earthquakes on a timescale of approximately once every 150 years. It was in the year 1857 when the San Andreas Fault in the southern part of the state experienced its most recent major earthquake. Consequently, geologists believe that section of the fault is a strong contender to experience another major earthquake within the next few decades. The San Francisco Bay Area is at a somewhat decreased risk for a big earthquake due to the fact that it has been less than a century since the disastrous earthquake that occurred in 1906. Yet, moderate-sized earthquakes that have the potential to cause substantial damage could strike at any moment. It is highly unlikely that a significant earthquake will occur without any prior notice. It's possible that there was a gradual increase in seismic activity along the fault for a number of years leading up to this earthquake, with some of those shocks reaching around a magnitude 5 in intensity. A shortening of survey lines across the fault, changes in elevation, and effects on strain meters and wells are some of the changes that seismologists anticipate seeing in the Earth's surface before the next significant earthquake. The town of Parkfield, located in the middle of California, was built on a portion of the San Andreas Fault that has been the epicenter of a moderate earthquake approximately once every 20 to 22 years throughout the course of the last century and a half. Because of this, it is the perfect place to investigate different techniques for predicting earthquakes. An earthquake of magnitude 5 or 6 is predicted to impact the area before the end of the century, and it could occur as early as the early 1990s. Parkfield has not experienced a severe earthquake since 1966. The United States Geological Survey has put a number of sensors in the Parkfield region and is currently performing a comprehensive analysis of the data that has been acquired in an effort to detect the conditions that might presage an earthquake with a magnitude of 7.0. What other possibilities are there for us? There is really nothing that can be done to prevent earthquakes from happening, but we can certainly find ways to adapt to their presence. Japan and Chile are two examples of countries where severe building regulations have helped save lives as a result of their implementation. Structures that are located in areas where earthquakes are common should have a well-thought-out floor plan and be built to withstand the shaking that can be brought on by earthquakes. There are some geological areas that are simply not suitable for earthquakes resilience, and these are the areas that ought to be avoided. On the other hand, Reinforcing structures that are already in place is a difficult and expensive task, and consequently, there hasn't been much progress made in this area. To put it another way, California is not prepared for a huge earthquake, and there is a good chance that a major earthquake will occur in the not-too-distant future. The only thing that research can do is present us with information. In the end, it is up to legislators and communities to put protection measures into place. Our understanding of the San Andreas Fault and the seismogenic mechanisms associated with other faults has made enormous strides over the past several decades. Despite the fact that neither of these subjects is anything near complete, we can only hope that when the inevitable earthquake does come, this information will be used to establish reasonable restrictions that will prevent loss of life and damage to property. Although people can do little to stop earthquakes, they can learn to live with the difficulties they bring. There are now 3 primary safeguards in the works to reduce earthquake dangers. Buildings in seismically active areas should be reinforced appropriately. The first is the development of building codes that stress the significance of thinking about earthquake shaking. Several regions have already begun retrofitting or demolishing older buildings that pose a risk during earthquakes. As a supplementary line of defense, the strategic arrangement of land can lessen the impact of hostile topography. Important or high occupancy structures should not be located in areas prone to landslides or the San Andreas Fault. The third line of protection will be accurate earthquake predictions. The most hazardous buildings can be quickly cleared out when this kind of warning is given. Since the passage of the Earthquake Hazards Reduction Act in 1977, numerous organizations have collaborated to better understand and predict earthquakes, as well as assess and reduce the risks associated with them. That's all for the video today. We'll be right back with more. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.